Well, hello, this is Barbara Kolm again, and I have the Director of Parliamentary Affairs of the Legatum Institute here with me, Fred de Fossard. Fred was our host today, and we had a fabulous free market roadshow stop here. Thanks for arranging everything, Fred.
It was my pleasure and Legatum Institute's pleasure. We have been planning this event for many months, as you know, Barbara,
yes.
And it's been great to get off the ground, and I hope Legatum Institute can do more with the Austrian Centre in the future.
Well, I do hope that we will. I mean, there will definitely be tons of opportunities.
Indeed, yeah.
And starting out with, Hayek's 80th anniversary this year of the Road to Serfdom, 50th anniversary of his recipient of the Nobel Prize in Economics, and many other, anniversaries that are coming up that resemble those great heroes of economic freedom, but also philosophy and.
And it's exactly what I want to discuss today. It was a very good moment to talk about not just economic freedom and deregulation, but also the importance of that to conservatism, which might be a bit counterintuitive to some people, but anyone, I think, should agree that if you want to have a conservative and prosperous society, you do need to have economic freedom, and the two really do go hand in hand.
You're totally right. And you as a public relations firm employee formally from 2018 to 2020, you developed a Europe-wide campaign for better regulation in the tech sector. And we were talking about the industry today and about all those regulations that come out of Brussels that are actually hindering the markets and that are hindering our prosperity.
I totally agree.
So what would you do on that front?
So you referred to what I did in 2018 and 2019.
Exactly.
I ran a campaign which was about building a coalition of startup founders in countries like Holland, Sweden, Denmark, basically the more sort of pro-innovation countries in the EU, against the Digital Markets Act. Obviously, overall, we didn't quite succeed because the Digital Markets Act got legislated for, and I think every warning we had about the DMA is coming true.
Exactly.
What it's trying to do about applying a new level of risk assessment, compulsory criteria for AI companies working in certain sectors is exactly the thing that we warned against, because it's going to drive away innovation and investment from Europe. The people that are going to benefit are mainly going to be the United States of America and actually London as well. Obviously, I'm British patriot.
Well,
I'm delighted.
Delighted
that Britain is going to benefit from it. But unfortunately, your subscribers might realise this, that Britain has also decided to do a similar round of regulation to the DMA. We have a thing called the DMCC, which stands for Digital Markets, Competition and Consumers Bill, and that offers similar levels of prescriptive, heavy, burdensome regulations on tech companies, backed up by huge fines and antitrust enforcement. So it's a shame that while Britain's regulation might be slightly less bad than Europe's, only slightly, Britain and Europe are both trapped in this terrible, terrible approach to regulation right now, which is only going to make European people poorer.
And I was just going to ask you about that, because before your current position, you were also a special advisor to Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is a member of the Parliament and a very profound and prolific advocate for free markets and freedom. And but you, as an author, you have written written about the grim state of Britain in many ways, and you have talked about the crack of freedom of speech, and the stifling regulatory environment that we live in. So what are the current biggest problems that you think Britain is facing, especially the next generation is facing, and how can we get over that?
Thank you for the question. So I know that many of the pieces I've written have been quite gloomy recently. I try to be as optimistic as possible. I definitely am a natural optimist, but if you read my articles in The Critic or The Telegraph or Conservative Home, you should be forgiven for thinking that everything is pretty terrible. And I think there are many areas in which British politics, the British political class, and unfortunately the Conservative Party, of which I'm a member and of which I was very proud of working for as a special advisor for 3 years, they're making wrong decisions. Some of these decisions are big picture issues. So this is just the entire philosophy around regulation, which is they have a deep aversion and fear of the sort of anti-model, anti-regulation Hayekian approach, where we should just allow the human spirit to flourish because we should trust the human spirit. That's something I believe in, but you try and tell the British political class that, and they just it's like speaking ancient Greek. The other thing is
well, then let's move it to Latin.
Yeah, precisely. Maybe it's slightly easier to translate. Then we have issues like, of course, mass immigration, which has been a long-running issue in Britain since, let's say, the late 1990s, and it has only increased in prominence. And the problem with mass immigration from an economic perspective, and I have great reservations to it from a cultural and perspective, social perspective, and one around nationhood as well, but from an economic perspective, as many of our panellists discussed at the event today, it is a massive incentive against productivity, innovation, and investment in the technologies of the future. If our energy costs are too high, if our labour regulations are too onerous, and if our tax system punishes better investment in new technology, why on earth would you bother getting new machines, new technology, new robots, new artificial intelligence, developing your premises to make them more productive, and go through the pain of reducing the size of an unproductive workforce, when the thing that the government is actually asking you to do, or making it easy for you to do, is just increase your output very slowly through mass immigration. It's a really, really big, important structural problem which is harming British productivity and therefore is harming British prosperity. Why the Conservative Party has fallen into this trap, despite promising at every single election it has fought since 2001 to reduce immigration, I'm not quite sure. I think part of it is a short-termist approach to accounting, public finance management that the British government pursues. We look at everything through very short 5-year cycles. So if making investment in new productivity enhancing technology in the tax system is going to pay off in longer than 5 years, the British state will argue against it. So all of these incentives pile up in the wrong way, and it kind of leads us to the situation that we have now, where you have no new development, you have no new technology, but you do have mass immigration, and we can't base our economic policy on that.
Well, despite the fact that Britain is the oldest parliamentary democracy in Europe, or at least in the world that we know of, so why is that the case? That is it the typical public choice standpoint that Jim Buchanan, the Nobel laureate, pointed out, when people just vote for those who give them the goodies, in other words, or is it leadership that just is misled by wrong policies?
It's a very good question. I don't think it's entirely just poor quality public choice. It's worth remembering that in 2010 the Conservative Party came first in the general election but didn't win an outright majority, but on an explicitly austerity platform. They campaigned to cut public spending, and that was more popular than Labour's campaign to cut public spending slightly less. And in 2015 the Conservative Party won an outright majority, and they did that by justifying their public spending restraint and saying how it was going to pay dividends in the future. Their big slogan in 2015 was long-term economic plan. They also promised a referendum on our membership of the European Union, which had managed to maintain enough right-wing voters to stop them bleeding away to UKIP. So it's quite clear that actually the British public understands these big questions and big trade-offs. The general public are not stupid, and they won't just vote for endless bailouts. I used to do some focus groups at the start of the pandemic, and before I worked for the government, and a really interesting thing people said in those focus groups was, wow, these lockdowns are going to have to be paid for somehow, aren't they? Everyone knows that public expenditure needs to be paid back eventually, intuitively. Everyone gets that public debt has to be managed and maintained. They know it can't be eliminated entirely, but it has to be sustainable.
There is no such thing as a free lunch.
Precisely.
And Lady Thatcher put it right.
Indeed.
Socialists stop working unless they run out of other people's money.
Precisely, right? And I think that actually the British public does intuitively understand this, especially as the slightly older voters will remember some terribly disastrous times Times in the 1970s, but also younger and middle-aged voters will realise that the free lunch era of the mid-2000s came crashing to a halt very, very aggressively in 2008. So those lessons have been learnt and those lessons are understood. I'm not going to blame the public. I think it's poor quality leadership. I think that managing a parliamentary party is often quite difficult. Managing the relationship between politics, the media, and a parliamentary party, and how vulnerable it can be to local and aggressive grassroots campaigns can also be very difficult. Maintaining resolve, but also making the argument as you maintain resolve, has been unfortunately quite lacking in British politics in the last decade or so. I actually think the conviction with which David Cameron and George Osborne maintains their approach to public spending in the early 2010s is quite rare in politics today, and we would do well for that kind of leadership now.
Well, that is something that Reagan already said, being wise in politics is very rare. So you mentioned one thing today, and I'm going to challenge you again on the next generation and then the young people that we obviously not only need in our movement, but also need in our think tanks and need to address with all the pressing issues and pressing questions that we have these days. And I would like to ask you to just repeat your summary that you did of the free market roadshow stop here at the Legatum Institute, because you also mentioned that this was kind of the plan for the next year, where you want to get involved actively.
Indeed, thank you very much. I won't be able to repeat it quite word for word, but what I will say is that as the Director of Parliamentary Affairs at the Legatum Institute, I was very proud to host the concluding leg of the 2024 Free Market Roadshow tour at Legatum. Legatum Institute is a think tank that we hope is going to be at the heart of the future of the shape of the British right and the British Conservative movement for the next 5 years, maybe decade or more. This isn't necessarily tied to a political party. It's about the ideas, it's about the movement, it's about the philosophy. And we want to use events like the Free Market Roadshow to convene a mixture of, free market, right-wing, libertarian, conservative, but also quite unconventional speakers to this building to be part of that. Because an event isn't just a talking shop, it isn't just a place where everyone can chat and have a drink and have a sandwich and say ideas they agree with and politely applaud. It's about building a movement, it's about putting together interesting people and intelligent people in the room and building the ideas for the next generation. So that's exactly what we want to do. This event is evidence towards that. This event was a brilliant way that Legatum Institute can convene the most important thinkers in Western conservatism and campaign to make this a reality. One of the events I was really proud to put together was the discussion around national conservatism or liberal conservatism with Dr. James Orr of Cambridge University and the Edmund Burke Foundation and Lord Hannan of King's Clare. Dan Hannan is obviously one of the most famous, noted Brexiteer campaigners going back decades. He was a Conservative MEP in the European Parliament, and I remember watching his speeches when I was a teenager, thinking how articulate he was about making his points about sovereignty and free markets and national independence in the European Union. But in recent years, I've got very captivated by James Orr, the leading national conservative academic in Britain, who put together the NatCon conference last year in London and is doing more NatCon events in the future. And NatCon is really interesting because in Britain, at least, there is a debate within British national conservatism about free markets versus regulation, about trade versus protectionism, about privatisation versus state capacity. While we're all agreed on cultural issues like immigration, like woke, like culture wars, like education and all that sort of stuff, the economic questions remain up for debate. And this is something that Legatum Institute is really committed to trying to, if not solve, then find a consensus, build a movement around.
Sorry to interrupt, but we need a place where those disputes can take place.
Precisely, and that's exactly what we're doing here, where it is a welcoming, friendly, high trust and understanding place where we have these disputes, but also work out our common themes. And one of the common themes that came out today was also about the dysfunction of the administrative state in Britain. And how the administrative state has run away from democracy. Britain voted to leave the European Union with the public motivated by the slogan, take back control. And the Conservative Party said, we're going to take back control of our money, our laws and our borders.
As Lady Thatcher said in her famous Bruce speech.
We did not roll back the frontiers of the state in Britain, only for them to be put back at Brussels level. And I think we've taken back control of our money, definitely. We've made bad decisions, but it's still our money, that's for sure. We've not really taken back control of our borders. We've decided to do bad things on borders, but again, it's a decision that Britain has made herself. And laws is half in, half out. Many of our laws remain European laws, and Northern Ireland remains subject to European law. So the situation is not entirely satisfactory, but it's hopefully going in the right direction. And this is what we want to see at the Legatum Institute. We want to see the redemocratisation of the British state, the administrative state, the sovereignty of Parliament properly restored, but also we want to see Conservative parliamentarians properly embracing the sovereignty in Parliament, remembering the supremacy of this legislature in our constitution and delivering Conservative outcomes for it.
Well, thank you very much, Fred.
Pleasure.
This is actually what the future will bring to us, to Great Britain, to the Free Market Roadshow across Europe and also across the Atlantic to the United States. We're looking forward to further collaboration and cooperation in many ways. Congratulations again, once again. This is a wonderful program that you have set up, and for the next year also that you plan to do.
Yeah.
And I wish you well with that. Congratulations. And
Thank you very much, Barbara, and thank you to the Austrian Centre for helping put this together.